Hello, everybody. Everybody, welcome to our talk on creating artist communities here as part of the OC Film Fiesta to our distinguished audience. We're here in the SA Exhibitions Gallery in the Santa Ana Arts Collective building. A new artist's live workspace, artist housing development that just came online like a year and a half ago, and it took about 5 years to get made. So we're really excited to have this conversation about creating artist communities, because we're in an artist community that was just came online here in Santa Ana, a city known for its arts, and there have been numerous starts in creating artist communities here. So we're here to have a conversation in 2021, at the end of 2021, to see what the possibilities are for Santa Ana, given where we are with the economy, with development, with the population, with the arts, and the rest of the county. But we have three people here who are, major players in the arts in Santa Ana that I want to introduce to you, that will be speaking about their vision of building artist communities, but also their experience as to what has already been as a baseline for what can be for here at Santa Ana. So I'm Victor Payan, the Executive Director of Media Arts Santa Ana. To my right is Pocha Peña, co-founder of Media Arts Santa Ana. Also, she was a chair of the Arts Commission, and she had her gallery, Pocharte Gallery, in the Centaura Arts Building in the late 90s. And next to her we have SKEITH DE WINE, who is founder of the ARTWALK in Santa Ana. He's been here since the mid-80s, and he's been to numerous places. He's in the Centaura building also. He had the Wonderland Studios, what's it called?
Smallest art gallery in California.
The smallest art gallery in California, but your studio.
Yeah, well, we had the Wonderland Studios over by the train station, and so I guess I would be one of the founding members of the train station Arts District.
Yes.
And then one of the earliest art galleries in the Centaura building, plus the Art Walk.
Okay, so it's a lot of things, and he'll explain that more with the mic in his hand. But the development is now where the Santiago lofts are, right across the street from that was an artist colony that he was part of founding. And it got torn down apparently, recently. So now you're in Costa Mesa doing interesting stuff there. And to your right, we have MAURIZZIO HECTOR PINEDA, who is the gallery director of the gallery here at SA Arts Collective. So I'm going to let them talk for a little bit about what their experience was. We're going to go down the line, and then we're going to have a conversation, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience, and then we're going to show a movie, which we're really excited about, Downtown 81, which was made by the New York arts community of the early 80s, legendary. So JEAN-MICHEL Basquiat's in it, Deborah Harry's in it, FAB FIVE FREDDY's in it, QUIñONES, Glenn O'Brien. It's a multicultural mix of all the people that were creating really vibrant art that went on to influence the country and the world. So we're going to see what it was like to actually walk down those streets in 1981 of New York, not the New York today, but the New York that everybody's nostalgic for. And hopefully see how what we're doing here in Santa Ana fits into that tradition. So we'll start off with Pocha. Pocha, if you'll tell us a little bit about yourself, your history in the arts, and your vision for the arts.
Okay, I'm Pocha Peña. I'm a native Santanera. And I was fortunate to have grown up with a father who was a professional artisan and carpenter over at Disneyland. So I was able to grow up with a lot of professional artists and seeing it as a viable, career path, something that, you could, pay your mortgage, send your kids to college on. From there, I, got my arts training at UC San Diego, Chapman University, Universidad Complutense in Spain, and finished up over at UCLA before going on to the Southwest School of Arts in San Antonio to finish up there. I was a part of several arts communities, one of them being Los Angeles' first art community, the Santa Fe Art Studios, just south of downtown Los Angeles, that preceded the brewery art space. And then, of course, I grew up at the time that the Santa Ana Artists Village was fabricated. We had an organic art community prior to that, very close to the Bowers Museum, right across from the Bowers Museum. Yeah, and I got involved in arts here in Santa Ana when I was about 14 or 15. I was a little peewee artist, and over the Cage Chameleon, and that's when I really saw what a transformative force arts and culture was in our city. And then as I, grew and time passed, I saw how that was kind of co-opted, marketed, changed, manipulated into the artist village that we know today. And of course, it's had its ups and downs and growing pains. So I felt that I'm a big believer in infrastructure. So I really felt that the next step was to have an arts commission, to have that kind of formalized structure at the city, so that there's a vessel for artists, generational artists, for the next several decades or in perpetuity, to actually organize and have some kind of return on the great investment and wealth that we do bring to the city as creatives. Thanks.
I'm SKEITH DE WINE, and one of the founding members of the Santa Ana art scene, going back to about 1994. So I opened up one of the first art galleries in the Santora, and a lot of my artist friends said that they couldn't afford to open up an art gallery. I found a little tiny space underneath the stairs of the Santora building, and for $20 a month, I opened up an art gallery, and I had artists like Lalo Alcaraz, Lori Hassel, Jeff Gillette, just to name a few of them, Aloysius Doherty. Most of the artists are now in museums, so that was quite an accomplishment. I'm kind of impressed and proud that I got to do that as a curator aspect. And I've always been a fine artist on the side, so I came into Santa Ana. I started out in French Park, migrated over to the train station, and filled up the building with artists, invited them in, and I think we had one, Charles Bickle, who's now a fashion designer up in Los Angeles. We had Squelch, who became one of the leading Orange County performance artists. We had Jeff Frisch, who's the head of OCA currently.
And the Airport Art Commission.
Yeah, the Airport Art Commission.
Founded
Jeff was there right about the same time I was, maybe a little bit earlier over at the Santiago Arts Complex. But I laid down the groundwork by inviting the city council members to our space and to participate in our art happenings. And they basically put on the books the development of the artist lofts in the train station district. So that was a lot of outreach to the city council members. Simultaneously, I went up to Venice Beach. I was exploring and looking at the artists like John Baldessari, Peter Alexander, Don Picardi. I wanted these guys as my personal friends, so I took a job in Venice Beach. I met several times a gal named Cindy Miskowski, who was the city councilwoman for the city of Los Angeles, and I interacted with her and I said, I've just come into your district, I'm in Abbott Kinney, and she said, well, that's a complete ghetto, it's really rough. And I said, I bet you I could change it. So at that point, I went down to SCIARC, and I brought in a bunch of architects, and I had them put their models and the maquettes in the burned out store windows. I knew that the Eames studio was right around the corner, so suddenly a lot of architects and a lot of designers spotlighted, and we put Abbott Kinney back on the map. Now Abbott Kinney is the #1 arts destination, and restaurants and chefs, world-class chefs, in that district. So that was transformative, and just knowing how to navigate both the city officials and where to go to other art forms other than myself as a painter and reach out to architects for help. Currently, I'm in Costa Mesa, and I think that I've looked at the prices on the real estate in the district, and I don't think most artists can afford it, but I have started spotlighting the fashion, the apparel industries in Costa Mesa. I know that Volcom and Ruka were there. Hurley just left, unfortunately, but I leased out the original Quicksilver apparel workshops. I had two friends that were the head designers for Abercrombie & Fitch find the studio for me. We have Paul Frank Enterprises there. We have the band Sublime there. We have the guitarist from Sugar Ray, Murphy Carges, teaching children music classes. We have a ceramic school. We have 2 filmmakers and 3 fashion designers in one building. And that has all been accomplished just in 3 years since I left Santa Ana. So my background is that I started at Cal State Fullerton. I went to Rhode Island School of Design. I was really good at writing about art history. I ended up at Harvard University at the bequest of my professors, and basically a background in the design and implementation of Renaissance cities utilizing the arts, which is one major way to reinvigorate a community, bring people together, interact with each other, break down social barriers, and basically create new commerce and economies within a city. Okay.
How do I go next? So I am MAURIZZIO HECTOR PINEDA. I am from El Salvador. I grew up in Orange County and Santa Ana. I went to all the junior colleges before I moved up to San Francisco, where my family, my dad and my mom said, if you want to be an artist, chase that dream. I can tell you, that means a lot, Dad. I have a gallery, and here we are. We're talking about a neighborhood that I was door dashing right when the pandemic happened, when all the projects went dead. And I saw this building, and I saw that sign, and it said gallery. And I knew, Emma said it too, you want that. And here I am. I'm directing, putting culture together, bringing people into the space. So, don't mean to be corny, but as a person of color that doesn't have a family that comes from finance or collectors, I know that world. I exist in that world. I have existed in that world for many years. But I always know that I'm like the brokest person in the room. Not broke as a person, but like financially. So I appreciate these people who have helped build this so I can be here and say these words to you. And I don't want to be sappy, but I feel that I need to be honest. Because the art world is cold, and the literature world is cold, film is cold, all of it. The creatives, it's cold. It's never a free ride. And especially if you come from people that look like me and he, they, it's a hard thing. And we have to eat a lot of, things and bite our lips. So I really appreciate you guys being here in this room to listen to this discussion of how you create community. Because to me, I have 1 intern, 2 interns. I don't need to sell anything. This place is not about selling stuff. It's about education. And for people to look at me and be like, oh, you look like I can do that. So normally I wear soccer gear. Today I wore a suit for them. But it's for you guys. Because I'm happy to be like John, who went back home. Literary reference. But I'm back. I'm home. And I want to share as much as possible with my community. Santa Ana, Orange County, Southern California. SAE exhibitions. Thank you. Beautiful.
Now, one thing, because I think a lot of us, especially in the Latino community, working class community, exactly that it's not from our background to be in the arts. Like, we're the first generation to say, yes, that's what I want to do, and then actually be able to do it, because whether our parents are migrants, or from farm worker backgrounds, or rural backgrounds, or whatever, the arts have been a path for us and other people to really find new avenues for their expression and to defend their communities and to speak for their communities and create new resources. Now, I know all of us have, we're part of a continuum. There were people that influenced us that started things in the 70s that made us who we are today. So I want to go down the line because we have two native Santaneros, Santaneras, and we have two people who are from San Diego, you're from Georgia. Tell us about, talk about the influences you had growing up. For me, I was very lucky to have, centers like the Centro Cultural de la Raza in San Diego, which was founded in the early 70s, Chicano Park, things that were really grassroots motivated, but that maintained their mission and their vision and fiercely expressed it and defended it and became world class, not by shaping themselves to what everybody else wanted them to be, but by protecting the expression that was their tradition. And so people like the Border Arts Workshop, Taco Shop Poets, Guillermo Gomez Peña, a lot of influential groups came out of there doing what it was, bringing what their vision was from their perspective to the world, and having centers that really, even if it was only having a fax machine or a printer or just a roof and four walls, that was enough to make a difference. So for me, it's San Diego and all the groups that were there. What about you, Pocha?
Well, growing up in Santa Ana in the 70s and early 80s, I was a latchkey kid. My parents split up when I was very young, so I spent a lot of time alone, and that was, of course, a very fertile place for creativity, and it was really something that kept me going, kept me uplifted, and moving forward. And it was something that I think my dad always encouraged in experimentation and in finding your voice and in finding different avenues for creativity, which led me to some of our early creatives here in Santa Ana. For me, when I was first starting out as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, there was a big explosion in punk rock here in the county. So we had some major bands, with the Vandals and DI and Social Distortion and Big Sandy. And these are all people that I actually got to meet when I was still not old enough to go to clubs, but I would, they would put together community shows, and we had all ages spaces here. Like Coos Cafe was just up the street, and that was an all ages space where someone like me, could go and listen to music. Cage Chameleon with Richard Espinacchio. To me, wow, I thought, wow, they're like grown-ups, and they were just trying to figure it out too, trying to figure out how to live in a space that was actually zoned a business area. So they came up with the idea of turning it into a gallery, and they created this live-work community, like a co-op that, had a place for a, creative 14-year-old, creative 15-year-old. There were a lot of, youngsters and teenagers, and we would go and we would volunteer. We would learn about how to prep a gallery, how to, put on a show, and we had all the energy and I think idealism to want to express our personal experience. And from there, of course, I went to Chapman initially, and then I was fortunate to go to Spain and study art history in Madrid through a study abroad program. I stayed there as long as I could for almost 2 years, and it was really an eye-opening experience because here in Santa Ana, I knew that Disneyland, you figure out that's a fantasy just because Donald wears a serape, a couple times a year. That doesn't mean that you have that broad-based, acceptance within the larger, social world of Orange County. You go to Huntington Beach, you're an outsider if you look like me, and there's definitely some places in Orange County that I knew I was welcome in, and others that I knew I was not safe in. So, but then when I went to Spain, suddenly it was the first time experiencing a society without the shadow of police brutality, a place where nobody was afraid of the police. There wasn't that brutality. Nobody was going to come and jump you. Where, you could sleep on the subway if you partied too much. You could go to art shows that lasted all night and end up talking to Nam June Paik, or really like giants in arts and culture. And that's where I met Bill Viola, who is one of our giants in video art, and started thinking, I can do this. I got these great pep talks, and was so fortunate to be taken in and mentored by some really amazing people. So once I came back to the States, and also I discovered Chicano art and Chicano literature in Spain. I didn't discover it here, where I was working at B. Dalton, at South Coast Plaza, and little bookstores. It was very rare that you would ever find anything beyond Sandra Cisneros' house on Mango Street, which meant the world to me, and Octavio Paz and Pablo Neruda, and that's it, those three, that's all they had. But when I went to Spain, suddenly there was this whole world of literature and music and movies that came from here, that my people were producing. And that's when I started to hear about Gronk and Asco and what they were doing and how they were being accepted by major art critics in France. So when I came back to California, came back to the US, it was really just kismet. It was a really lucky break that I was actually, I was producing short films and got into a film festival in San Antonio, Texas, Cine Festival, which I was lucky to direct for 2 years. A few decades ago, and was kind of discovered by a major art critic, major film scholar, Chan Noriega, who's also written a lot about Chicano cinema and film, and we started to get booked on major shows with Guillermo Gomez Peña, who is MacArthur Genius Award for Performance Art. Got to meet Gronk and Juan Garza and the Asco people through Chan, and had my first show at MoMA in San Francisco as like a 20-year-old, 21-year-old. At 20-year-old, because I wasn't able to drink yet somehow I magically found a martini made its way to me. So it was something that I was exposed to at a very early in my career. I had this window that taught me how to navigate this treacherous art world, and also provided me a lot of support and protection, because I think it's very easy to be exploited and to lose your way. It is a very cold and harsh place, but with this community that began to expand into the beautiful mental menudos of Los Angeles, and I think that's where I really found my core community. The Mental Menudos were a series of roundtable discussions that were put together by Magu of the Chicano art collective Los Four. And they were basically where we would discuss concepts of art history, social justice, where artists fit in within those worlds. And it was really expansive, and a lot of the people I met through Mental Menudo are still in my world today, so I think those were really like the big influences in my life that brought me to where I'm at now.
Wow, that's a lot. So
I was cute.
Coach is making me kind of think about it, a couple things, and it's basically how and where does the art community come from? If I take some inventory about it, I think I have to look, because I came out of the South and I trained with a really, really famous gay artist named Larry Knatzer, who is a Southern primitive artist, and he introduced me to Howard Finster and a lot of the other primitive folk artists. But then I got bored, but I was hanging out in Savannah for a long time, and I went back up to Atlanta, and they're like, you gotta go to Athens. And they're like, you're gay, right? And I'm like, oh, why? It's like, is it that obvious? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, you have to go to Athens because this is where the Indigo Girls and REM got their start, in the B-52s. And you need to partake in that scene and bring that with you. You'll always carry it with you. And I always loved the music from the three bands. So I remember going into Athens an awful lot, meeting the artists there. When I got back to California after college, I would say a good 50% of my friends were gone. They were dead. They'd all died of HIV. I would go to friends' houses and the parents would slam the door in my face and tell me never to come over to the house again because everybody was in denial. So, you know, I'd just come out of New York before I went back to Atlanta and Savannah, and it had a dark cloud over itself because Andy Warhol had just died. The Village was coming to a close, but I was keeping close tabs on Keith Haring. I was looking at David Wojnarowicz, these major touchstones of gay artists. And I think I ended up in Santa Ana. I wasn't super excited about it in the beginning, but the other option was to go to LA. And being gay and just not wanting to deal with that dark cloud of HIV, I hid out in Santa Ana, and I just like, out of boredom, I'm like, fine, I will create my own insular art scene and bring my friends in and secure myself away from just so much pain, so much agony. And I started getting in the car on the weekends, and I started devoting my entire weekends to Santa Ana, to building a scene, to inviting all my gay friends from Los Angeles down. And the word got out that we were throwing these crazy parties after ARTWALK, and you had to go to SKEITH's art studio down by the train station. He was bringing in and filling up the building with all these different artists. And in the midst of it, some of the Q's guys, I caught their attention, and they didn't have any objection or care whether I was gay or not. They were like, dude, we could care less. You just like, you throw a great party and we want to hang out with you. And you have all the energy and you have all the fashion designers. You just need the music. So the Q's crew moved into the building, and I think they filled it up with 4 or 5 artists at the time. And I'm just trying to think, like, suddenly my whole life took a drastic change. They're like, hey, dude, do you want to go with us to Compton? We're going to like one of the major hip hop artists, and we're going to meet all the Compton graffiti artists. And then we're going to go out tagging in the riverbeds late at night. And I'm like this conservative Wonder Bread white boy from Orange County in the middle. And suddenly I'm like hanging out with them, cutting chain link fences, and we're graffitiing in the riverbed. And I'm like, this is amazing, because suddenly my whole world just changed and shifted from preconceived notions. And I remember like thinking about Keith Haring going down to the subways and doing graffiti artwork. And I said, maybe I need to keep his spirit a little bit alive, because he had passed at this time. So I did these parodies of every artist in Santa Ana. I did these black panels with these silhouette faces. And I knew like one artist worked for Raytheon Industries, which makes nuclear bombs. And I wrote on it and made the white outline face, bombs by day, art by night. And I would like parody all these different artists, and I hung them all up in the trees in French Park. Well, the next morning, I get this phone call, Skeith, were you down in French Park last night? I said, no, why? And they said, well, there's an article, a very interesting article, and you said you were going to buy some black paint yesterday. And I said, oh, you remember that? He goes, yeah, so you made the newspaper, and you're in the front page of the Metro section, and there was a whole story of artists like does guerrilla artwork in French Park in Santa Ana. So suddenly, and nobody's, like, I've never told this story. I'm looking at the artwork this week, but I've never told this story. So up until this point, nobody's even known who did the graffiti artwork in French Park. I was out wheat pasting because my graffiti friends that moved into the Santiago building said, you need to like experience this. You need to go out and do art at night, and you need to force it on people. And there's a high that comes with that. And there's a challenge of, is your message going to be relevant and connect to the community? If it's not relevant and it doesn't connect to the community, it'll be painted over the next morning. But if it does connect with the community, it'll stick around for a while. So I was doing these performance pieces about reading tea leaves. And I remember seeing John Waters' film about teabagging. So I did all these posters all over the new OCA building with these guys just in jock straps, and they had teabagging written on them and everything. It was really funny. And I thought, Santa Ana needs a little gay art, public gay art. So I went out and did it. And those things stayed up on the wall for 6 months. That was so funny. Like, no, I think it was a comfort zone that nobody wanted to go up there and pull down the posters of just like this torso with a jock strap. But you gotta have fun with your community, and you know that, like, because Santa Ana is so Catholic and this kind of gay element is such a challenge for them, it was the right place and the right time to introduce that. So, you know, that just kind of goes with it. I will say that anybody that's trying to build an arts community, one thing I've learned is when I came into Santa Ana, I made sure that I was a bartender at the bar where all the city council members went as their regular watering hole. And I would get them plastered drunk. And then I would get them to commit and promise me certain things and certain funding for certain projects in the city. When I went up to Venice Beach to go work on Abbot Kinney, I took a job at the local gay bar. And I endeared myself to all the business owners and would say, come by after you get off from work tonight and I'll give you a free shot, wink. And I would get to know everything going on Abbot Kinney, and it gave me greater insight into how to navigate and invite the right people that would mesh with the community. So, for example, I knew a guy that was really big into surf art, and I said, why don't you open up a store that just deals with surf artwork, the art of surfboards? He did, and it kicked off the whole explosion in the Abbot Kinney district. And so I was just kind of like keeping my eyes open for the right people to constantly circle through the bar and let them bring their friends, and then just wait for the opportunities to present themselves. So if you are going to build an arts community, I think one really great place to do it is establish yourself as the local bartender. You know everything going on in your scene.
That's hard to follow up to. I feel that my approach to building a arts awareness is by utilizing my experience to bring communities from elsewhere into a community. I've never liked the term locals only. So I feel that because I've been lucky enough to navigate the art world and see different communities and meet different artists, that within this space, that's what I want to do. I mean, that's the mission statement. To bring artworks that communicate with the community, and there are multi-entry points. So it's never too high art or too low art. And when you look at an installation, you, as the community, will know, okay, it's for me too. So that's kind of how I like to, or the way I envision how you build a visual community and engagement with students. And even if they're, junior high, elementary,
Oh, that's me, sorry. Put it up a little bit.
or
You can bring it
even
back.
intergenerational. Like, I want people to understand that this space, that they can ask questions. And I always love it when I learned this when I was there in San Francisco, when you would get a young student and cross their arms, and it was always like an alpha, male or female gender. It's like, whatever. And then you start asking, like, what do you like about this? And then they start understanding, like, wait, you mean that it's okay that I don't have to like it? It's like, yeah, you don't have to like it. Just because it's on the walls doesn't mean that you can question it. And that's what art does. It should do that. It's where sometimes, you know, there's vanity. I don't like to do a lot of vanity. But yeah, you go to a show, an installation, and you start asking questions. Like, is this art? Like, and then later on, you know, they'll figure out, like, yeah, that person, you know, teaches at Stanford or Harvard, and, you know, and they come from families like your own. And I think that's important for this space, is to create that kind of community, to welcome that community and to welcome this community that I sit here sometimes on Saturdays and I count how many cars go by and it's just like thousands. And they're not pulling in. They're not pulling in because they don't see it as a gallery. And it's just like, how do we get this community to understand that we do have art for them, where it's free and welcoming. So, you know, I do believe that Orange County can be a city of the arts and a city of nonprofits, so we can not worry about a budget and show art. So I can't follow, like, whatever they said was beautiful, but that's how I feel. That's how you build a community, is by understanding and appreciating, and then bringing people from other sources to the community so they can understand and realize that we're the same.
So I'm hearing all of you say, when we're talking about building artist communities, the most important word in there is community. You each have identified artists that inspired you, that welcomed you in, spaces that were open to you, and also an understanding that there were spaces that were not open to you that you needed to open, subversively, using humor, using art. And I think you've each done, you've opened a space, you've opened space, you've opened spaces. And like what you're talking about, dealing with the decision makers who are creating the policy. And I know that we've done a lot of that with United Artists of Santa Ana here in Santa Ana, you know, talking with the city council and the staff to build policy, reaching out to the community to see what their needs are, so that there could be policy to address that, but also knowing that it's very fragile, that councils change, mayors change. Here in Santa Ana every 35 years, but they change. So that whatever opportunities you have, you might need to start again. So Santa Ana has had a large, you know, and vibrant art history. I hate the word vibrant, but I'm going to use it here. In a lot of disciplines, performance art, you have Chris Burden, murals, you have Emilio Vasquez, Sergio Jocatiz. There's a lot of people that have done murals. Music, I don't know so much about film, but theater and literature. So when people talk about the art scene in Santa Ana,
The golden age of Hollywood was here.
oh yeah, Hollywood definitely film, because in the 20s and the 50s, Marlon Brando grew up here, Steve Martin and Rita Hayworth, Anchorman,
Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell, Diane Keaton. So if you're in film, this is a really good place. Chaplin, we're here. Fatty Arbuckle lived here. So really, really great tradition. So when people talk about building an arts community now, or the Santa Ana arts scene now, it seems to me, from my vantage point, that they're trying to shoehorn a definition of what that's supposed to be. And then usually that involves, you know, being buddy-buddy with developers. You know, and in the past, and as we're going to see with the movie tonight, a lot of communities where the artists have come in have totally gentrified. And the artists haven't had, you know, they had to leave because they didn't have a role in shaping that. They get blamed for it, but they actually didn't shape it. You know, so now we're at a place in Santa Ana Or what we're trying to do is create that dialogue where artists can say, well, this is what we need. We're investors in the development, so we need to be, our needs need to be considered so that we're not 30 years later pricing ourselves out. So I'm going to ask you guys a double question. What do you guys see as what makes the Santa Ana arts community special and unique? Because every arts community is different and every arts scene is going to be different, but the development has tended to end up the same. So what makes Santa Ana special, and what do you think needs to happen to create a development that serves the residents and the arts community?
Okay. Well, Santa Ana has historically been a geographic central point, a meeting point, a place of convening for Southern California. I would imagine from indigenous days, this was a very, very fertile land. We had, when the Spanish expedition, remind me, what was it? Portola expedition
like
came up.
Like the coffee.
Like the coffee, Portola. When they first came up, was it in the 1600s? 1700s?
Might have been
1500s, a long time ago. They didn't find a virgin or vacant, landscape. There were a lot of Native Americans that were here. And when Portola actually stopped off in Orange County and camped out by what today I think is Lincoln and maybe Lincoln and Orange Olive area, kind of in North Orange, was actually where the Portola expedition camped. They had to camp to the west of the river because there were hundreds, if not 1,000 natives already living on the right bank of the river, and they were very healthy, and it was a very symbolic meeting point between the West and the indigenous people. It was so fortuitous that there was an earthquake at the moment that the two groups met. And it was, when I read the account, it was really kind of heartbreaking because the natives knew that the landscape was changing. They had seen the ships. They knew that the colonists were coming, and they knew they had to make alliances. They knew that they had to, find somebody on that side that was going to engage with them, intermarry with them, become a part of their community. And they offered these members of Portola expedition, they said, please come and stay with us. We will share with you our antelope, our seeds, our cultivated crops. I mean, they had a whole litany of all the fabulous food that's naturally found here. And I think a couple of members of the Portola expedition actually did return. And then that led into the California period, where this place again became a convening place, a place where all the California families from the Inland Empire, from Los Angeles, from San Diego, they'd all come and meet in central Santa Ana. A lot of folks don't realize that this was a hub of power and culture.
Commerce.
And commerce. And a lot of this was centered around the area of Bristol and First, where there was a giant hacienda known as El Refugio. It was owned by the Yorbas and later sold to the Sepulvedas of Los Angeles. And it was the place where all of these California families would come and have week-long fandangos. So music, live music. And all day, the men would do business and calculate and schedule out the commerce for the entire year. And by night, they'd all, have social engagement. And, the young men would meet the young women, and they'd, set up the alliances and the marriages, and then everyone would go back to their ranchos after mixing. And so this was really that place where there was a place of intersections. And I think that's what really interests me today. It's still a place of intersections. It's still a place where you have that meeting between Los Angeles, San Diego, the Inland Empire. This is a very central location. And so if it's leveraged in the right way, if it's organized in the right way, it has the infrastructure that it needs to really to really soar as it has in the past, I think there's something very vital here, especially because in California, arts and culture is the number one revenue generator for our state, even more than agriculture. Think of all the subsidies that agriculture get. They get practically free water. They get all these subsidies for, their crops. Art doesn't get any subsidies, hardly, barely any. Film and TV production get very little by comparison to places like New Mexico or Louisiana, yet we outperform the New York tri-state area year after year after year in revenue, in tax revenue, in earning power, just what people earn in the industry, employment numbers. So this is really a major anchor industry. Arts and culture, film and TV, surfwear design. This is the epicenter for this kind of production in our nation. And yet it's hopping in LA, it's hopping in San Diego, Pomona, and now the Cheech and the Inland Empire are capitalizing on it. Where are we? We were the hub at one point. Santa Ana, geographically, golden location. Where are we? Because of our lack of infrastructure and knowledge, and also just, valuing this amazing, treasure of gold that we have at our doorstep, it's just been passing us over. And in the meantime, our families are getting dispossessed. Our kids are struggling to earn enough to be able to remain in the city. Yet at the same time, when you mix art and technology, as is booming now with app development, gaming, all this stuff is happening in Orange County. It's here. We don't need to bring it in from out, it's already here, and they need people of color. For the first time, it is such a desired thing to have, because we need to diversify tech. We need to diversify the design industries. This is what makes companies competitive. When people go for those government contracts, those international contracts, they're scored on their diversity, how many women they have, how many people of color they have. Now that we have come out of a very repressive immigration policy era, we can't just import people in like we used to from India. We have to cultivate them here. And what does Santa Ana have? The youngest population on the West Coast. Largest concentration. Ooh, yeah, it's hopping. And this young population, are we connecting them with these amazing jobs that with only 3 to 6 months of certificate training, entry-level junior developer, they start at 80 to 90,000 in Orange County. No college degree needed. If you know how to access these industries, it's just, there's amazing wealth here that our residents could greatly benefit from. It could really transform our community. It could provide more stability, more options for, our youth. And that's what really activates me, because I have seen how our city has struggled, how we've really been like a step away from, it's just been like starvation diet for decades and decades. And now we have this tremendous potential for wealth, and not just to generate the wealth for the people who are already wealthy, but to actually have it truly, tangibly benefit our working class communities. Because service industry, that will not pay your way anymore. A family cannot get by on a minimum wage service industry job. Factory jobs, they're not there anymore. Everything's getting automated. So really the creative industry, especially where creativity intersects with technology, that's what we have here right now. We have the labor force ready to go. We've got all these kids, ready to go somewhere. I'm really invested in cracking that open as much as possible, because those opportunities aren't going to be there forever. Eventually, we're going to start importing people again. Things are going to get saturated. This is really the time to strike. This is the time to create that infrastructure, make sure there's equity so everybody can benefit. All our residents can and should.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think right now you have to kind of keep your eye out on Orange County and Santa Ana because everything is going through a big transition and a flux. One of the biggest things is that Facebook is turning into quote unquote rebranded as Meta. And Oculus is based out of Irvine. So Lucky Palmer is immediately in the vicinity and he is one of the new right-hand men of Mark Zuckerberg. So you need to pay attention to that. You have Peter Thiel, who is the venture capitalist, who I think, in my opinion, is probably going to run for president of the US at some point, and he'll be one of the first gay candidates out of the running gate. But his company, which is a defense contracting company, is also in Irvine, but also with a tech headquarters over in the area of Santa Ana by MacArthur Boulevard. A lot of people aren't paying attention. Santa Ana has always been central. People seem to forget it, but also right now I see Santa Ana going through an extensive amount of redevelopment and reinventing itself and trying to hang on to a little bit of its historical architecture, but it's bulldozing a lot of stuff. Pocha fought for the fire station recently, so we applaud her for making those efforts. And it's a weird time. I'm over in Costa Mesa. I transitioned out of Santa Ana, where Costa Mesa, I'm in the warehouse and industrial district, and it's a great place for artists. But a lot of the real estate developers want that parcels of land because it's got oceanic views. My art studio has a panoramic ocean view, and I fought like tooth and nail to save a wildlife preserve 5 years ago called Banning Ranch, and pulled some pretty heavy strings to make sure that there would be a natural park for artists to come study nature and the environment, and then they would have their art studios in the surrounding natural preserve. And it's interesting to see, we look at Chapman University, it's this little podunk college going back 25, 27 years ago, and now it's turning out all these new kids that are making their films and their movies on their cell phones now. They don't even need professional equipment. They can do an entire film, and their budget for making a film could probably come into $200,000 if they have the right people surrounding them.
And it's one of the top film schools now.
Yeah, and so, we have these incredible things happening around us. I'm not happy with Disneyland, though. I do have to say that. I think it's abandoned what Walt Disney had envisioned. He saw Disney as always changing, utilizing the latest, greatest technology, and Disney seems to be capitalizing off of, we're gonna buy Marvel Comics because this is gonna make a bunch of money, and I like Marvel Comics, don't get me wrong, but Disney seems to have steered away from Disney's vision. However, I will point out something that was really interesting when I first got to Santa Ana. In 1992, maybe 91, Pixar came along, and it was a little tiny studio. We had a lot of guys that Cal State Fullerton had just opened up an animation department. Disney needed animators, and they needed them bad, and they needed them fast. And they cleared out the entire animation department at Cal State Fullerton, whether you were first year, second year, third year. They didn't even have a fourth year yet. They took all the students and said, we'll pay you $40,000 a year. That is the equivalent of about $80,000 in today's money. And they heisted them all the way up to the Valley in Burbank. And they all are now like major filmmakers, film directors, and everything else. If you don't think that's not going to happen here with the entire meta universe on their back door at UC Irvine, it is. And a lot of the kids, if they're at the right place at the right time, these companies are going to come in and clear out the entire cachet of freshmen and sophomore college students. It's a given. You know it's going to happen. They're going to have so many technical problems, and they're going to want everything fast-tracked.
So yeah, the question is, what makes Santa Ana unique with its community for the arts, and what does it need to create an arts community that's going to serve it and its residents?
So this is something that I've been thinking about. Is how do I educate, not me, the gallery, how do we get people who actually know how to work within the art world, architects. Trying to get someone to work here to install a show, it's very hard. Not just because of the pandemic, but, and I even asked a friend of mine who works at the Orange County Museum of Art, where does he get his art times? And he's like, they all come from LA. So to answer that question in the way I'm going to answer it, I feel that it's having spaces to educate a new generation of not just the generation like, well, I want to make a lot of money making my drawings, but there are ways to be successful in art. You can be a registrar, a conservator. And I think that a lot of times communities like Santa Ana, they focus on that, I just want to be famous doing this thing. But it's also, I think, I have the opportunity to show that there are other ways, like you can be a web designer at a gallery. You can do their whole campaign. And so many times communities, especially communities of color or lower of bracket, that income bracket, it's just that one goal. They have to make art, they have something to make money. But there are other reasons to be in the art world. Like my first job as an artist was changing a cow play. And I climbed that mountain. So I feel that a lot of times I hear people tell me like, well, how do we educate people to become art stars? But it's like, no. Look, Enrique Chagoya told me, my professor, not to drop a name, Enrique Chagoya told me, if you want to become famous in the art world, it's like winning a lottery ticket. If you do what you want to do, by the time you're done, you're extremely lucky. But if you do it because you want to be famous, by the time you're done, you're not going to trust anyone around you. And at my age now, I completely understand that because I trust the people that I can text and call or DM for questions. And there are certain people that you know that they think you're asking them for that contact or that gallery. No, you just have to go into this like art and culture and cultivating spaces. And even if it's only a few people that show up, then you do it anyways. And that's why I do it. That's why we're here at SAE. We just show up.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of, like you said, doing events for people to show up, I don't think Santa Ana has the real infrastructure that lets people know what's going on. I mean, like the Downtown Art Walk, they have a huge budget to do that. You know, the graffiti scene, they have a huge budget to. They're very commercial artists, but to do grassroots community art, there's really not. I mean, the Centro Cultural de Mexico does it. You know, OCTAC and Latino Health Access do it, but I think they're kind of insular. They don't reach out community-wide, you know, to create a whole scene. They're doing their thing with their populations, but it doesn't help it reach out across the aisle or across barriers, for example. I think that, you know, you're all touching on the tremendous amount of talent there is in the young community and the lack of opportunities there is for that young community and the need for the city here, and any city really, to create those pathways early on. Like if you want to succeed, it's not about fame or getting, you know, big galleries here. It's about having the opportunities, because really, I mean, you know, all those people that we see as celebrities, you know, they're writing their celebrity, but nobody's famous overnight. They all did 20, 30 years of hard work for nothing to get themselves established. And if they didn't have the craft, if they didn't have the community, the connections they built over those 30 years, you know, you could have really talented, and if there's no doors, you know, it's just true of our community. There's a lot of talented people that don't make it. If that's how you're measuring it, you know, that's not something that's been available to our community. We don't have that luxury. We have to measure by other things. I like to measure it by impact, the number of people you reach. And like you were saying, if you're still doing it 30 years later, you've built that body of work, you can teach, and when you do hit it, you've got 30 years of work that you can show people that maybe nobody. So that's like what we see with literature. People write like 7 novels and then they hit with a big novel and then suddenly everyone wants to buy their 7 novels. We like film, Pocha and I with Media Art Santa Ana like film because you're dealing with writers and photographers and filmmakers and designers and actors and musicians and hairstyle people and costume people and trainers and animal trainers. So that's a discipline that really does require you to have a community. Unlike some of these others that maybe like if you're painting or you're doing a mural, you need a smaller community, but I think they all need that infrastructure. And for Santa Ana to really thrive, or any community really, it needs to have something for all the different disciplines, not to focus. Because I always look at it as some disciplines lend themselves to artists who are very vocal and very overconfident.
Yeah, because I need to interject on this real quick.
Sure.
And that was when I looked at the Costa Mesa art scene, I wanted it to have a painting sensibility. I wanted a school of painters. And I looked and evaluated the scene, and that's not what the scene was about. The scene was about the interaction between sports and fashion. And suddenly I was like, I'm approaching this entire wrong way if I want to make this an art scene, because it's really not about painting. It might be about painting and textile design, but overall, it was all about fashion. And it hasn't got a cohesion of bringing the large companies like Hurley and Volcom
And Vans
together and say, okay, we're going to give you guys some seed money to create a little fashion college, and we're going to spotlight your fashion industry, and we're going to do a group showing a group exhibition once a year. You know, I look at South Coast Plaza, which was almost annexed to Santa Ana, but Santa Ana backed out on it. And one of the greatest opportunities recently I saw missed was that when the Sears building closed down, they didn't turn that into a museum of fashion. Every mom and her daughter would have gone to South Coast Plaza to stop at the Museum of Fashion, and then would have exponentially spent money in the retail stores. And I look at the family that runs South Coast Plaza, and I just thought how narrow-minded. They were more concerned with the dollar value and didn't realize that if they had implemented and put some money into the fine arts on one of their large money-making entities, they would have made 3 times, 5 times as much money. And globally, it would have sent out a signal to the rest of the world that there was a fashion museum at a fashion mall. And everybody in China and Japan, India, would have all been talking about it, and people would have been trekking across the world, and they could have had world-class exhibitions. They could have shown dresses from famous operas and history.
For movies.
They could have shown, first ladies. They could have Dolce and Gabbana come in and do a fashion show and a whole museum exhibition. Andy Warhol and his fashion and his influence on the American culture through fashion. It's a lost opportunity, and we constantly have to take these people by the hand and say, you've missed the opportunity once again. Santa Ana missed the collection, Severin Wonderman collection of Jean Cocteau drawings, paintings, and film. They didn't want it because it was gay. Wow. It was one of the things, okay? We had the Severin Wonderman, we had the Clifford Stills collection. The Bowers was in a bid to buy it. They decided because it was abstract and it was too weird, and Santa Ana, a lot of people didn't understand abstract artwork at the time, bypassed and missed that opportunity. So you had 2 major institutional art collections, Clifford Stills and Jean Cocteau that could have been housed in Santa Ana and would have sent a beacon out to all the people in France about Jean Cocteau, and the largest portion of his collection was housed in Santa Ana. So you get all the French filmmakers and everybody else coming to the city, and then a touchstone in abstract expressionism, Clifford stills, and you would have had everybody in New York trying to build a bridge from New York into Santa Ana. And that's a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
And I look at city council members and planning and economic development not having enough background, and importantly, education and the fine arts, and missed opportunities and sources to drive in income into the city, which is what their bottom line is.
Yeah, and if I could say also to piggyback on those lost opportunities that are, neglecting our creative and cultural strengths, just being blind to the treasure right in front of you. Here in Santa Ana, for the longest time, we were a center for quinceañeras, right? Like on 4th Street, we had like 60 quinceañeras. And then when we had a developer who, some developers who claimed, maybe ancestrally they were here for 100 years, but mentally and culturally, they still had and have an outsider mentality in wanting to impose something from the outside onto something that's already working. At one point, 4th Street generated more money than South Coast Plaza. At one point, that's how vibrant it was. With those 60 quinceañeras, they weren't a bad thing. And then Disney, of course, we had the argument, hey, we don't need 60 quinceañeras, we just need 1 or 2. And, do we really need all? Well, when you've created a magnet for an entire ecosystem, because that's what the arts are, they are an ecosystem. It's not one kind of art, just like you don't want to eat one kind of food all the time or listen to one kind of music all the time. You need the emerging artists. You need the folk artists. You need the avant-garde, the abstractionists, the high art, the lowbrow art. You need it all together. The self-taught artists, the pedigree artists. That creates a vibrant, beautiful, dynamic community. That's what the quinceañeras in their ecosystem represented. And just at the same time, it was so frustrating, at the same time that I was hearing in economic development, these developers say, oh, that time is passé. Those quinceañeras, people don't even want that anymore. Well, at that same exact time, Disney decided, and again, Disney doesn't go into anything unless it's going to make them gabillions of dollars. They had studied the market and found that actually quinceañeras were a really solid investment for Disney, and they started a quinceañera line. Disney did. They started a whole series of quinceañera services for Disney. You can have a quinceañera at Disney. They have different packages. You can have at Disney their hotels. Each of their Disney hotels have quinceañera packages. They have quinceañera showcases. Why didn't we have a quinceañera museum? Disney could have brought that right central to our 4th Street downtown quinceañera museum. People would have gone as they come shopping, they would have visited it, and again, it could have been a showcase for a kind of fashion, a kind of artistry that's not just dresses. Quinceañeras include, there's dance, because you've got choreographers, there's music, there's a whole orchestration, there's food. So it's an ecosystem, again, that is rooted in tradition, in our local tradition, that is kind of our terroir. You know how they say, like with wine, right? It's so much of a wine's flavor is the earth that it comes from, the environment that it grows in, the climate that it grows in. That's called terroir. Well, here in Santa Ana, we had our own terroir. We have our own essence that feeds and creates special flavored vitality, and we don't appreciate it. Our business leaders aren't even thinking about cultivating what's already here, what's already working. Instead, it's like, oh, this sucks. I'm going to come and I'm going to, it was flagging before. There was nothing here before till I came in. And that kind of attitude is really very imperialist and very colonialist, and I really don't think serves our community, at large.
Yeah, and I recall during that whole period when the quinceañera, shops were being attacked, right? It was like, oh, we don't need this, we need more bars, but we don't need more quinceañera. It, like you said, it was flying in the face of the facts, it was flying in the face of the data, and it was flying in the face of what you saw with your own eyes. But the developer, primarily one developer in Santa Ana, you can research this issue, was telling the city, and they believed it because he had the money to back up his message, that what was not obvious to them was true. Was saying, oh, it's a dead thing, nobody's coming for this. And he really sweet-talked and sugar-coated that message until they bought it. But if you look back at...
And now we have a dead downtown.
Yeah, now we have
Now look at downtown.
But if you look at the data from that same period, it was against what this guy was selling. So for the city not to get any other messages, any other input, I think that was a big mistake. There needs to be the infrastructure that before a city makes a decision, they need to have all the data. Because otherwise it'll be sweet-talked and sugar-coated into making a terrible decision.
Special interests.
And really undoing, like you talked about this being a traditional art form, what would have been probably 100 years of economic development for this industry. We're talking limos, we're talking dance lessons, we're talking rental of halls, we're talking the makeup, the hair, the food, the whatever, all of this stuff.
And if I could just say real quick, and thinking outside of the box, even today, beyond quinceañeras, what do we have here? We have Comic-Con, we have this comic book, what's it, where you role play and you have the... Cosplay. How many Comic-Cons, WonderCons would have really benefited from the Santa Ana artistry of our, bell gowns and dome dresses and princess dresses? We have a handle on that. It's something that is a skill that, we have all these artisans that specialize in. We should have a Santa Ana booth. The city of Santa Ana should have a booth at every single Comic-Con repping our formal wear designers, because they're really amazing, very imaginative, thinking outside of the box. It's an alternative revenue stream. It piggybacks on the popular culture wave that's exploding right now. Come on, think outside the box.
And if you look at some of the big, arts-related conventions that are happening in Anaheim at the Convention Center, you've got WonderCon, BlizzCon with Blizzard, and the music one, NAMM, North American Music Merchants.
Don't forget the Star Wars Con.
Star Wars Con. I didn't know about that one.
You've also got
But I was going to say that
who does World of Warcraft?
BlizzCon.
Oh, BlizzCon, yes.
And I was going to say that all of those have people in Santa Ana that could piggyback. Like you could ride from Anaheim to even have buses to come straight down here. There's a music union over here, so to connect with NAMM. You've got all the youth that play the Blizzard games, but there's no spaces to have any of this. I know that when we have our film festival, we're looking for spaces to have receptions or parties or screenings, and there really aren't as many as there should be. But I'm from San Diego, and I tell this to Pocha every chance I get. We have coffee houses galore in every community. When I was 18, 19, 20, just out of college, I could name you a dozen coffee houses I could go to and write, and they had free parking. They were open till 11 or 12. No one hassled me to get out. You sit in a restaurant in Santa Ana, and
open
in 5 minutes, they're asking you to buy something or leave. And the parking's $1.50. If you stayed more than 2 hours, you can't, and then you get a ticket. So that's really hostile to the kind of creative work that our community needs to do. So I want to wrap up, everybody. So do you have anything to say before we do the final round?
Thank you, everybody, for coming and listening to this amazing conversation.
Thank you. All right, well, you jumped the gun a little bit, but we'll get to say. So what I want to ask is final thoughts, and we can open it up to questions from the audience, is back to what I was saying. What do you think Santa Ana needs to create a vibrant arts community, or any community in general? But, and we're very conscious of art washing and gentrification, and Santa Ana is very strongly against that. But what do you think Santa Ana needs to create the arts community it deserves, and where do you see it in 5 years?
I think for the last 30 years, what we've really needed, 30, 40 years, are really incubator spaces and low-cost studio spaces. live work spaces that are truly equitable and open to our artists and creative community. When I was coming up, I remember we were so excited about the East Village Studios, one of Santa Ana's first art colonies, because we were told as artists that there would be a public kiln that we could use there, that there would be glass work, there'd be a wood shop, and you could just pay a membership and you could get access to this. Because most of our communities, it's very specialized, electrical setup that you need to even have a kiln. There's a special infrastructure you need to work with glass. And if we could invest in these kinds of incubator spaces, for example, the right ventilation system so that aerosol artists could do their work. This is not something that you can readily find in your average, apartment. And it's really getting really tight to even find something that's sustainable. So that's why, as part of United Artists, trying to get this building converted was so important, because when I came back to Santa Ana after working in different cities in the arts, and Los Angeles, San Diego, Rome, San Antonio, Texas, and returned here, and it was hey, where's the infrastructure? Where's the art community? It's still like it was back in the 80s, with this cult of personality and inconsistency and starvation, of arts facilities, that we don't really have these resources. No, we need infrastructure. We need an art commission. We need to have, affordable live work. And when we went to the city as United Artists to ask for planning, hey, we're losing our studios, we're losing our incubator spaces, nobody lives at the Santora, nobody's at the Empire anymore, they've all changed ownership, and they're kind of hostile to our artistic processes, right? Our artistic practice. You need to replace it with something. They bulldozed the Wonderland Studios. Where do we go? You market all of your real estate with its proximity to the artist village. You market all your restaurants with their proximity to the artist village. Everything is sold, bought and sold, with the veneer of this creative community that can't even exist and survive here, because they can't eat, they can't pay for a roof above their heads. You need to create an infrastructure for this golden goose so it can keep laying those golden eggs that bring beautiful opportunity and vitality to our city. Well, the Planning Commission told us we cannot build low-income housing for artists because they are not a protected class. You need to go to DC and get them declared a protected class. So we did. We got to DC and we tracked down our electeds and our representatives, and we found that artists were already a protected class that could have affordable housing built for them, along with veterans, along with the disabled community, with the elder community. There's a whole list of protected classes. At that time, we were only looking for the creatives, and were they on that list? And that's what we came back with. But there should be, foster youth should, I think, be a protected class. Maybe, single mothers should be a protected class. There's a lot of, you've got to really think about, the vulnerable parts of our population, and should they be a protected class? Yeah, I think a lot. We see a lot of people in our streets. I think there's a lot of vulnerable populations that do need to have that kind of bolstering, certainly our creative industry. So we came back, we shared what we learned. Hey, they're already a protected class. We started shopping it around, just crashing development events, crashing the, GROW conference, and just making signs saying we need live work spaces. We need affordable housing for artists in Santa Ana. At every time we heard of developers convening, we held a breakfast over at the Wonderland Studio over at SKEITH that really jump-started this building. A brunch, because that was at the cheapest meal that you can host for people, and we invited anyone and everyone that was remotely related to construction and development, because this is not our natural field. We don't speak that language. but they do, and they understand the points and the incentives and the permitting and the zoning. Like, so we need to work together so that we can inform each other. This place is a miracle that it was created. Unfortunately, it took a long time because of weather issues and zoning issues and other things, and then it opened right in the middle of a major pandemic, so that really was kind of put a damper on a lot of the goals and plans that were had for this population that's housed here. This is just this is our first time doing it. Let's do it again. Let's keep growing and learning and refining and improving on spaces like this building that are accessible not just to college educated artists, but to artesanía, artisan artists. There's people that make paper flowers. That is a viable art form. People that that do other kinds of traditional arts and crafts. That's a viable artwork. Self-taught artists. And so we really need more spaces like this, more incubator spaces to really have it blow up. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and just to add another comment on what you were saying about our advocacy to the city is that artists were a protected class, and Senator was listing off the other protected classes, but we also reminded the city that artists are also veterans, they're also disabled, they're also, unhoused, they're also all, like every category that people qualify for affordable housing, artists are in that category. And a lot of them are teachers, they teach after school classes, they teach kids, but that regular affordable housing doesn't serve their needs. So if you're retiring or you're a teacher and you just need a place to live and just quiet, affordable housing works for you. But if you're an artist, you can't create there. Everyone goes to sleep early. There's no proper ventilation.
You need ventilation.
Yeah. So what what was instrumental in this is to say, you can't leave artists out of that discussion, and you can't leave everybody else. Think that artists are some special little butterfly over here. That we're working people. We're people with skills. And I like what you said earlier about how
major economic driver for our region.
That agriculture gets a lot of incentives, but art, the art sector generates more revenue but gets no incentives. So housing is a good way to help keep that afloat.
So I think looking from my time in Santa Ana and looking at my time in Costa Mesa, the biggest issue is that the city does not assemble an economic impact report to find out how much the arts drive in. They and we all need those numbers. We need them in every city in Southern California. We need them in San Diego, we need them in Orange County, we need them in Santa Ana, we need them in Fullerton, we need them in Costa Mesa, we need it in Los Angeles, we need it in every little district of Los Angeles, because the arts transition and they transform an entire city. And when we built this art scene, I did not when Disneyland got built, no, Disney didn't anticipate how many cheesy hotels were going to come in around the theme park. When we built the art scene, going back to 1994, we didn't realize how many restaurants would come into town and how much tax revenue that would drive in to the city just alone on that. And the city never applauded the artists for driving in an entire restaurant industry into the city, which then bore a nightclub industry on top of everything else. So that wasn't fair. The city never said, wow, you guys really did a bang up job of bringing people to the city. Unfortunately, our art scene kind of got drowned out because it became more of a party, bar drinking, bar brawling atmosphere, and I was very disheartened to see that. I was furious, to be honest with you, because it went from interactions with families and children to a lot of drunk people out in the streets, and that was just absolutely unacceptable. It would have made it easier for me to leave Santa Ana, I think, at that particular point. When it comes time, I'm doing real estate these days. And one of the things I do notice, like in Orange County, and I'm also seeing it in Los Angeles, is that we're running out of land at this particular juncture of California history. I, as a real estate / architect guy, am always up against the wall to find a parcel of land to pitch to the real estate developers to utilize. Now, I keep in mind can an arts component be incorporated into a new piece of property for real estate development? The problem with Santa Ana faces right now is that it's older, it goes back, 100 years, and the developers are looking at old pieces of property. The generations want to get out of it. It's been in the family for 4 generations, 5 generations. They're going to sell it on the cheap, and they're going to split it between 5 siblings. So the real estate developers are waiting on the sides right now. And so suddenly there has to be some sort of a coalition that says it has to incorporate some element or aspect of arts if the city is going to keep an arts identity. And that came into play. What was it, Washington, or what was it up in Los Angeles? They didn't want the artists to come in because they knew they would lose their identity really fast.
Boyle Heights.
Boyle Heights.
Boyle Heights.
So, you have to lay down the rules and the foundations to the city council. One of the things on the west side of Costa Mesa I proposed to the city council member is there cannot be any franchises in that district. If you are going to continue and maintain an art scene, everything has to be a mom and pop. The franchises will drive and kill the art scene in 2 seconds flat. There's nothing worse than your little herbal, medicinal store.
Botanica?
Yeah, Botanica, suddenly transitioned into a Rite Aid. It's gone. So you have to keep that in mind. The really new entrepreneur chef trying to open up his first restaurant that's going to bring in people from all over Southern California, he's gone because Applebee's came into town across the street from Main Place Mall. But had it been a little mom and pop restaurant, people would be talking about it. Perfect case in point would be if you go up to Silver Lake, Echo Park off of Hyperion, it's Casita del Campo. It's this LGBTQ restaurant, and the drag queens do a drag version of Charlie's Angels down in the basement on Friday and Saturday night. Well, guess what? Everybody in LA talks about it and at least has to make a trek over to Casita del Campo at least once a year. Now, if that ended up being a TGIF, I guarantee you nobody's going to drive over there, and it's not going to drive in and bring in new interest into the city. And so the cities and the city officials need to be smart. They need to be wise. They need to take the advisement from the arts community. We know. And another perfect example. When I was looking for a location to put a fashion college into the city, I said, this is the location. And I went to Daniel Englers, who is head of economic development for Costa Mesa, and I said, I want it here. And he goes, why do you want it there? And I said, because the Senior Citizen Center is right next door. Can you imagine a bunch of younger generation fashionistas doing fashion, and the old ladies across the street would come over and they would give them tips and show them how to sew in old, forgotten, traditional ways. And suddenly the old people would feel young and the young people would feel wise. And that is why you need artists to guide a city in its development.
If I could do something real quick, just piggybacking on what Skeith said. There's a saying, I think I heard it at Americans for the Arts or something, and it was, no one visits Paris for the banks, right? No one goes to Paris for, to go to a Rite Aid. Nobody comes to Santa Ana to go see Rite Aid, So we really need to protect the uniqueness, the historical quality, the terroir that really makes the magic happen.
Following up, I also think that part of what I have to do here is to bring out that terroir in the artists and the young folks that are here that might feel that they are limited in the kind of artwork that they make. Through the programming of SAE exhibitions, I am bringing artists and showing solo exhibitions so the community in Orange County and in Santa Ana can understand a deeper understanding of their own practice. What I've learned through my practice is group shows, you don't get that. But when you show a solo show, an installation for one artist, then a person can come back and understand what it means to have a discipline. It's like writing, a novel. It's a hard thing to do. Short stories, also hard to do. But I feel like that's what I bring to Santa Ana and Orange County and Southern California is the opportunity for people to see and get a deeper understanding of an artist's practice. And all three of you know how hard it is to have a practice and to go deep into it. And it's hard. But we do it because we have nothing else to do, right?
One of my teachers would say, would that we could do something else, or would that we could not do art, but I have a professor, Jean-Pierre Caron, actually, who would say, would that I could do, not be an artist. It's something that comes from such a deep place, and it's such a driver, that need to create, that once you get hooked, you can't stay away from it. And it's a torment to sustain it. And when you see that kind of fire, that kind of creativity in such a diverse community like this one, where you have the potential for this intergenerational exchanges, for for classes to mix, for upward mobility, for wealth generation, for long-suffering, communities. Man, would that we could pass that up. No, we can't. We've got to go for the gold.
I agree. And also it's the ability to have a conversation with the globe. And that's what I want my community of Santa Ana and Orange County, the youngsters and the people who are in junior college, it's like, hey, you can have a conversation with the globe through food, fashion, music, poetry, literature, performance, photography, film. Like, that's the thing. It's like you can.
Yeah.
And I'll take that a step farther. You can have a conversation with the past and the future and help creating the future. And I think you guys have all said some really amazing things, and you have really wonderful perspective, and you're all doing the work. And for my concluding comments, I guess I would say that in order to fully understand the impact and the possibility of an artist community, a scene, or whatever you want to call it, it helps to have seen it in action. San Francisco, San Diego, Athens. When you see it in practice, and the vitality and the joy and the creation. And Athens is a small town, it's a college town, but they never thought that they'd be cranking out the B-52s and REM. And
it was a fluke.
no, it was the conditions. It was the right conditions.
It was all those intersections.
Murmur is an amazing album.
Yes.
Howard Finster was down there, and he ended up doing the album cover for the Talking Heads. So,
but it's also about the right conditions. And same with like cities like Austin and San Antonio. Austin's too expensive to live. San Antonio isn't. They're making more art in San Antonio. They've got more commerce in Austin, but they're making more art in San Antonio. And I think Orange County is not LA. And for a long time, it was a place you could come and sequester and create work, but it's getting more expensive now. So my closing comments are to create an arts communities, from the comments that you made, the city needs to acknowledge the economic import and impact and revenue of the arts, of the artists. There have to be spaces and opportunities for the younger artists to professionalize and be seen and have these conversations with the world. And there needs to be, and I think some of you said it earlier indirectly, but I think there needs to be a healthy amount of criticism and self-criticism so that we can pick the best and to be able to say, this isn't working or this isn't for our benefit, let's come to the table and do it. And I don't think that Santa Ana does that very well. I think it needs to improve in the self-criticism, the avenues, without, like you said, taking it personally.
I think it's called artistic rigor.
And artistic rigor, but just creating those conditions to find what grows naturally here, the terroir. We've identified that there's multiple disciplines that have done really well here, and build on that. Not on these empty promises, because I know that there was a time when same developer, not going to mention the name, Google it, that worked really hard to turn the arts district into an entertainment district, which meant the emphasis was on bars and partying and bands that don't get paid to play. But in doing that, the city bought the story, and it de-emphasized from the things that it had just invested 30 years in. So to have an infrastructure like the Arts Commission, like an Arts Advisory Board that helps guide these decisions will really help, in this case, Santa Ana, make a lot of money off of creating opportunities for people to do the work that they love to do.
And share the wealth. And more importantly, share the wealth so that our residents that are here can stay here. Not just stay here, they can thrive for generations to come.
Thank you. So I want to thank you guys for coming today. Thank you all for this wonderful presentation. It's part of our 12th OC Film Fiesta virtually to the world.